Good afternoon, all. Number one, thank you for being here today. My name is Gregory Brown. I'm the policy counsel at the ACLU of Maryland, and today we are here on a historic day. March 7th marks the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, in which civil rights activists took a brutal beating on their march for not just civil rights, but voting rights and the rights of Black Americans in general. So, first, I would like to start off with a moment of silence for those victims that took that beating on that day. Thank you. So, as I said before, my name is Gregory Brown. I'm policy counsel here at the ACLU of Maryland, and all the people around us are gathered here in support of passing the Maryland Voting Rights Act, SB 878 and HB 1104. Today, HB 1104 will be being heard in the Ways and Means Committee at 1 p.m. And we are all here today in support of it. And we are all going to speak to why Maryland needs a Voting Rights Act and why we need to continue to bolster the voting rights of the people in Maryland. So, speaking today will be Carl Snowden, who is the convener of the Caucus of African American Leaders. Raleigh Hayes, who is a senior organizer for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Adam Leos, who's the senior policy counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Morgan Drayton, who is the policy manager of Common Cause Maryland. Valencia Richardson, who is the legal counsel for the Campaign Legal Center, and myself. And again, I'm the policy counsel at the ACLU of Maryland. First, I would just like to start off by saying what the bill would do. So, HB 1104, if enacted, would prevent voting discrimination before it occurs by requiring counties and other jurisdictions with a demonstrated history of discrimination to get pre-approval of certain voting changes from the Attorney General or a court. Expand protections for voters who don't speak English as their primary language. Protect voters against intimidation and deceptive practices. Make it easier for voters experiencing discrimination to fight back in court, and add critical enforcement tools such as a statewide database of demographic and voting rules. So each speaker here will be speaking to one of those things that the bill does. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Carl Snowden, who is the convener of the Caucus of African American Leaders. I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you so very much. Let me underscore the need for voting rights. He had mentioned earlier that March 7th, which was that day that John Lewis gave literally blood and people died for the right to vote. It's so important that here in Maryland that we make it easier, not more difficult for people to vote. When people are able to participate in the process, when everyone's able to participate in the process, it makes a better and stronger democracy. I'm so proud of the fact that in the state of Maryland, we have led the way. It looks at the fact that following 1965 Voting Rights Act, look at the great progress that we've made in the state. It's an amazing to know that 25 years ago, the flag came right at this very location to protest the fact that we would have had Black history. 25 years later, we have an African American governor, Speaker of the House, Treasurer. We have an Attorney General. The progress that has been made. Again, when people are able to vote and it's easy for people to vote, we'll have these incredible great changes. So I thank you. I look forward to supporting this legislation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Snowden. Next, we will have Raleigh Hayes from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Raleigh.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Raleigh Hayes. I'm a senior organizer at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Since our founding by Maryland native Thurgood Marshall, LDF has worked to protect and empower Black voters. This has included extensive advocacy and litigation around the Federal Voting Rights Act, often considered the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. The Supreme Court has undercut the landmark Voting Rights Act. Congress has struggled to restore and strengthen it, and Black voters face the greatest threat to our rights to vote since Jim Crow. In this landscape, LDF has advocated for state voting rights acts as critical measures to protect Black voters and other voters of color. Maryland is a top priority for this work because of a combination of significant Black population, demonstrated local need, and promising leadership. Neighboring Virginia passed the Voting Rights Act in 2021, and New York State followed last year with the most comprehensive version in the country, including a robust pre-clearance requirement, also featured in the Maryland Voting Rights Act, which my colleague Adam will speak on in a moment. These laws built upon previous efforts in California, Oregon, and Washington State, and this year we are working to pass state VRAs in Connecticut and New Jersey, in addition to here in Maryland. Maryland can be on the cutting edge of a national trend and set an example other states can follow. Today, on the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, when Black Americans bled for basic rights, Maryland has the opportunity to carry forward that legacy of courage and be a national leader by addressing critical local needs.
Thank you, Raleigh. Next, we will have my colleague and friend, Adam Leos from the NAACP Defense Fund.
Hi, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Raleigh. My name is Adam Leos, and I'm Senior Policy Counsel with LDF, Legal Defense Fund. Pre-clearance is based on the simple principle that when it comes to a matter as fundamental as the right to vote, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The Maryland Voting Rights Act pre-clearance program is modeled after Section 5 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, which was one of the most effective provisions ever designed for eradicating voter discrimination. It contains a framework to determine which local governments come under the pre-clearance requirement based on a recent history of race-based discrimination in voting or in other arenas such as housing or the criminal legal system. The State Board of Elections, in consultation with the Attorney General, will determine which counties, towns, and school boards come under pre-clearance under the legislation and the framework that it outlines. A key feature of this pre-clearance framework is that it is responsive to current conditions based on recent evidence of discrimination. So the specific list of jurisdictions will change and evolve over time, as some places will come under coverage for new violations and other places will roll out of coverage after a sustained period of non-discriminatory administration. For those places in the pre-clearance program, the Maryland Voting Rights Act provides a streamlined, time-limited administrative procedure to get an expert review of key voting changes before they go into effect from the Attorney General to make sure that they do not discriminate. Counties or towns can always go to court as an alternative or to appeal. Recent Federal Voting Rights Act cases here in Maryland, such as the Baltimore County districting case, show that the free state can benefit from this streamlined pre-clearance process. And beyond redistricting, pre-clearance can help ensure that Black and Latino voters don't face longer lines at the polls because of polling location consolidations, which have been happening here in the state. By avoiding the need for costly litigation, the pre-clearance program also saves time and effort from voters and saves taxpayers money. Enacting the Maryland Voting Rights Act's pre-clearance program is a critical way for Maryland to become a national leader while meeting a critical local need. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Next, we will be having my colleague and friend, Morgan Drayton from Common Cause, Maryland.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Morgan Drayton, Policy Manager for Common Cause, Maryland, and we're proud to stand with civil rights groups, advocates, and lawmakers in support of the Maryland Voting Rights Act. This legislation would help ensure that every Maryland voter's freedom to cast a ballot is protected, particularly those voters from communities that have historically been denied the opportunity to participate freely and equally in our political process. Over the years, we have passed many voting reforms within the state, but we acknowledge that they aren't working for everyone. This bill will help to protect what we have and takes proactive steps to ensure that disproportionately disenfranchised Black and Brown folks aren't left behind. Common Cause believes that for democracy to work for us all, it must include us all, no matter our race, age, background, or zip code. We look forward to working with legislators to implement this powerful legislation, making Maryland a national leader in protecting the vote and making voting more fair, equal, and accessible for all communities across the state. Thank you.
And before we go to my colleague Valencia Richardson, I just wanted to note the sponsors of this legislation. Delegates Stephanie Smith and Charles Sidnor have worked extremely hard in crafting this legislation to make sure that the voting rights of Marylanders are protected and not violated. They unfortunately cannot be here today, but I just wanted to make sure that they were noted and appreciated. So next, we will turn to my colleague Valencia Richardson from the Campaign Legal Center.
Good afternoon. My name is Valencia Richardson, and I serve as legal counsel for voting rights at the Campaign Legal Center. As Gregory noted earlier, today marks the 58th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, when 600 peaceful demonstrators marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, to secure their right to vote, and were met with violence by the state. 5 months later, the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965 was signed into law, banning racial discrimination in voting. 58 years later, we still have a long way to go. Campaign Legal Center believes the right to vote is a basic American freedom that every citizen should have equal access to. But like any state, Maryland is not immune to racial discrimination in voting. For example, in Baltimore County, the county recently faced litigation over a gerrymandered map that discriminated against voters of color. Federalsburg continues to use a discriminatory at-large election system where a Black candidate has never won an election, despite a significant and growing Black population. If enacted, a Maryland Voting Rights Act would be a critical tool that goes above and beyond the Federal Voting Rights Act to protect voters of color from discrimination and make the dream of a truly inclusive and equitable democracy a reality. Currently, the only options voters of color have is to file a lawsuit under the Federal Voting Rights Act. These lawsuits are extremely costly and time-consuming. Taxpayers and voters are the ones who pay the price. The Maryland VRA, as we'll discuss in our testimony today, gives voters of color a more effective means to enforce their right to vote by encouraging communities and local governments to work together to fix discriminatory election systems before resorting to costly legal battles. Even when it is necessary to sue to enforce their rights, the Maryland Voting Rights Act gives communities a broader range of options to fix a voting rights violation. Our democracy is strongest when every voter can participate in it. The Federal Voting Rights Act remains an important tool for voters to fight discrimination in voting, but it has been significantly weakened since it was first enacted. Today, it is up to state lawmakers to go above and beyond the floor set by the Federal Voting Rights Act to serve voters of color who have faced discrimination in voting for generations and continue to face them today. Maryland, in particular, has an opportunity to join the growing number of states that have adopted state-level voting rights acts to protect voters of color and strengthen our democracy. We look forward to the day that the Maryland Voting Rights Act is signed into law.
Thank you. And let's get a round of applause for our speakers.
Great job,
And we want to be clear that the intent of this legislation is not to pass Maryland as a bad actor in need of correction. The intent of this legislation is to make sure that where voting discrimination or intimidation or any other sort of violation occurs, that there are remedies in order to fix that. We want every person in the state of Maryland to be able to vote freely and fairly and have their vote count. We do not intend to have frivolous litigation outside of this or anything that could possibly, be cast as a poor result of this legislation. The intention is to make sure that every person's vote, that every person's ability to vote is protected. And so I just want to thank everyone here, especially Mr. Carl Snowden, who is one of the affirmative, authoritative voices on voting rights in the state of Maryland. And if anyone else would like to say anything or have any other comments, please feel free. But outside of that, thank you all for being here. And we will be all attending the hearing in the Ways and Means Committee at 1 p.m. Again, the bill number for those that are watching at home is HB 1104, sponsored by Delegate Stephanie Smith.